Na 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 na. Really? This is our big send-off for the Fox X-Men movies, and I don't even get that? I don't even get the X2 theme again? No? Man, I miss 2014. Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and today I'm going to tell you how I felt about Dark Phoenix. I am flying solo today because Eric wasn't able to see the movie with me last night, and I wanted to go ahead and get a video out. I'm not going to do a full-blown spoiler cast for this. I may talk spoilers next week on the Captain Logan Show, if anybody's interested in my ins and outs on this movie, but I'm going to do just a real quick how I felt about on this. I figure this is the one big superhero movie this year that some people, even if you see every superhero movie like I do, might be on the fence about whether or not they should even bother with it in the theater, given just the reputation it already had even before it came out. This is a movie with a production that's mired in turmoil, that took forever to finally come out, that has a studio that doesn't seem to be particularly sure about it, that doesn't have a lot of faith in it. We know that we're getting a reboot very soon with the MCU, and so unless this was a big, great tribute movie, which is not what it looks like it is, a celebration of the last almost 20 years of X-Men movies in the same continuity, loosely in the same continuity, made by the same studio, it looked pretty pointless to a lot of people, and that's made even worse by the fact that it looks like it's just a remake of X-Men 3. And you know, I did a Facebook post last night where I said, I'm going to the theater right now to see X-Men 3 2, and somebody said, well, it sounds like you've already reviewed it. And that's fair. I usually have a wait-and-see attitude about these kinds of things, and I tried to as much with this, too. I mean, like, I was ready to be won over if it ended up being great somehow. It just looked really awful, and I thought this was a bad premise in the first place. Not necessarily doing Dark Phoenix again, although even when that was announced, I was like, I mean, we did that already. It would be, unless you're doing, like, a completely different thing with it, it'd be really nice to adapt some other material. How come we still haven't done Mr. Sinister? But then the previews came out, and it looked like a remake of X-Men 3. Just from premise alone, we already knew from the trailers that Professor Xavier suppressed memories from Jean Grey, and that has something to do with the Phoenix now. It's not exactly the same thing, and I mean, we knew this too. Like, it couldn't be exactly the same thing as it was in X-Men 3, right? Because it's not a metaphorical Phoenix. There is a Phoenix from space. There is a Phoenix Force, and it's called that takes over Jean Grey, or goes into her body and then lowers her inhibitions and tears down the walls in her mind and makes it so that she remembers all the things that Professor Xavier suppressed, but it's not another personality. But still, it's really weird that we did that idea again, and so I called it X-Men 3 2, and yeah, it is that. It feels like an attempt at making that movie better. It more or less does that, so mission accomplished, but it's still not a good film. Right away I'm going to say not feeling it. I didn't like this movie. It's better than I expected, but my expectations were very much in the floor. So I guess I'll start with stuff I liked. Tonally, I enjoyed this all the way up until the third act. In fact, even though I had a lot of story issues with it, and I thought that there were some characters that were way thrown under the bus, a couple of my favorite characters are just, or at least characters that I've liked a lot in this franchise, I guess. I don't like what's done with them at all, and I really don't like the note we're left on with them, particularly Beast and Professor Xavier. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that later on, and I'll stay away from spoiler territory. But anyway, and even though it's like it's super melodramatic and difficult to totally take it seriously, I can't say I wasn't enjoying it. I don't know if it was entirely on the level that the movie expected me to, but it doesn't have tonal inconsistency problems. It's not that, and so like it accomplishes that over X-Men 3. Whenever a really tragic thing happens, because yeah, it's a movie with dark in the title, and it is dark. When something really tragic happens, it doesn't immediately undercut it by doing a big comedy scene right after it, so or doing, I guess, just a joke immediately after, like X3 does. So that's good. Again, being better than X3 isn't saying a whole lot, but I do think it accomplished that. I'd rather watch this than X3. It is a real tonally somber movie. It's got a real ominous thing going through it, and I like that a lot. I also really like the status quo that we opened with at the beginning, and I just wish that it wasn't such an easy pendulum swing. Right away, the X-Men are public and liked, and mutants are more accepted than they have been before, and it kind of watches honestly like mutants are entirely accepted, which ends up being really silly because one mutant does one bad thing, and then it all comes crumbling down. And I have a really hard time buying that in the last 10 or 11 years, or however long it's been since X-Men Apocalypse, this set in 1992, I have a hard time buying that there have been no incidents at all where a mutant using their powers killed someone, which started to make the presidential administration wonder if they should continue supporting mutants and put them in concentration camps. In the trailers, you see that the X-Men get picked up and get collars on them that suppress their powers, and so I don't mind spoiling that happens in this. It's one thing that happens, and then the policy changes entirely. And there are a lot of people with really powerful abilities in this world. I don't, and if there have been no incidents at all, so are you telling me that the X-Men have stopped every time there's been a problem, the X-Men have stopped it? Anyway, I'm getting back into criticism mode again. I'm trying to talk about things that I liked about this movie. But I like that status quo at the beginning. It ultimately ends up feeling like the Spider-Man 3 thing, where it's like everybody loves Spider-Man, and so we have to do the inverse of that very quickly, and it just feels too oversimplified. But I like it at first. Minor spoiler, the president has an X phone. Like the Bat phone, he's got X phone. And that's the best. Like, I want that prop. This movie gets a 0.5 bump up just for the X phone on the president's desk. It's great. The problem with this movie is not directing, I don't think. Maybe people that are more well-versed in the cinematography and stuff will argue with me on that, but I expected, Kinberg directing this, that it was gonna do a lot of just really, odd counterintuitive things with the camera, and it would have, major pacing issues, and it would have major, editing issues. It doesn't. I think it looks fine. I think there's some really cool action in this movie, and like I said, it's got a real weak third act. I would love to know how the movie was originally supposed to end, because it just feels really lame. And when we finally get, or when we get there, kind of too quickly. The movie's too short, by the way. When we get to the train, because I had read that originally there was a big climax. I think it was supposed to take place in space. It was some other locale. Originally, there was this more epic climax, and then there were reshoots, and it had to go in a train. And when we get to the train, I'm like, really? We're already there? And it goes on for a long time, and there's some great action in it, but it's depressing how just anticlimactic and not very exciting this ending is, except for some cool stunt work. What else do I want to say positive about this? The score is great. This is a Hans Zimmer score. Remember when Hans Zimmer said that he was finished doing superhero movies? He's not. He's still doing them. I miss John Ottman, of course. Was not surprised that he wasn't involved with this because he was teamed with Singer. I don't know if they're still working together because of what's going on with Singer's career right now. So I don't know what John Ottman's doing, if he's editing other movies for people that aren't Bryan Singer. But he was the editor and the composer for 3 of the X-Men movies, for X2, for Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse. And I didn't expect to see him back here, but it was a little bit of a bummer that he wasn't. Although it is kind of nice that trying to tell this bleaker, more ominous story. I mean, I say that Days of Future Past has that too in the future with the with the the Sentinels and the Apocalypse, not to be confused with Apocalypse, but there is an apocalypse that happens, because that's kind of post-apocalypse. Anyway, so I mean, I guess that was really bleak too, but this is trying to carve out a very different tone from these other movies, and if only it had a script to match. But I like the score a lot. I think, Zimmer does a good job. It's not his best work, but it's good. But, other things, I like the way McAvoy is trying to play an older Xavier. I wish he looked older than he does. That's a thing that a lot of people complain about with the trailers, comparing what McAvoy and Fassbender look like to Stewart and McKellen, because this is only 8 years before the first X-Men movie in now an altered timeline. Assuming that that's actually supposed to take place in that year, because to be fair, the X-Men movies, starting with X-Men in 2000, were ambiguous about their dates, and then it seems less ambiguous once we give dates going back to First Class, but whenever that's supposed to happen, it can't be too far from this. So it is kind of silly that nobody seems to have aged in like 30 years. Everybody looks about the same. And we didn't do anything to try to age anybody up, really. But McAvoy is doing a lot in his performance to try to say, look, I'm an older Xavier. I really like how he's lowered his voice. I say it's trying to play it older. It's also trying to play it more morally ambiguous, which I want to love, because I really like morally ambiguous Professor Xavier. That's one of my favorite things in X-Men comics. And there is an attempt at that here that I think ultimately ends up falling flat, and I can't tell you what in the world it's trying to say with Xavier. This movie seems to have, and I realize that it takes place a lot of years later, but the main thing that it is criticizing Professor Xavier for doing wrong is the thing that happened 2 years after Days of Future Past. And so it's hard not to feel like it has a different attitude about Xavier than its previous films. And with the way this ends up ending, he gets a little bit thrown under the bus, especially because I don't entirely buy that the thing that he did with Jean in the past is as bad as they're playing it up to be. He is real cocky at the beginning of this movie, and he is bordering on doing that kind of Stan Lee Xavier thing, where like those comics don't seem to realize it, but he's constantly controlling people, manipulating people in the name of peace and harmony with humanity and mutants, but it's kind of his world and everybody else is just living in it. He's got that in this to a degree, and like the idea seems to be that he's that because he achieved what he wanted in creating more or less peace with humanity, he's now seeing himself as superior. And that's ultimately, though, not what he's being criticized for throughout the movie. It's just he's being criticized for the memories that he took away from Jean in order to she's got a tragic past that I think is really super contrived and is kind of the silliest thing in the movie, and he suppresses her memory of the death of her parents. I guess I'll just say that that's not a major spoiler, and he ends up throughout the movie being chastised for it, and his character arc is learning that what he did was wrong. And I think there's a debate there. I don't think it's as clear cut as the movie is making it out to be, and I think the bigger issue is the attitude he has at the beginning of the film, which he ends up changing because he ultimately decides that he was wrong about the thing that Hank and some other characters are telling him Hank and Mystique were telling him he was wrong about, which I'm just not ultimately totally buying. And then Hank gets thrown under the bus hard. I think what's done with him is absolutely abysmal. That's the place where I get off saying it's a little offensive just in what it does to his character. And then the way it kind of redeems him at the end is weird. But yeah, it's a very strange film. On a purely superficial level, I enjoyed watching it until the third act. Even with stuff I wasn't liking that was happening in it, there's a bit of a style and a panache to this movie that I enjoyed. But again, it just doesn't have the script to match, and it again, kind of continuity be damned with this, right? Because like it can't keep track of even stuff that happened in its last film, much less the rest of the continuity with the stuff that that happened before the reboot. Like, how come in the same continuity where the Phoenix used to be a metaphorical Phoenix, used to be an evil personality, there also is a Phoenix Force, and it just happens to look like a Phoenix, and it does the death and rebirth thing, and people end up calling it the Phoenix? But more than that, because like, I guess I can see like the personality thing not developing the same way with the reboot, although even that I have kind of a hard time with. But forgetting that for a minute, just with last movie, am I remembering this wrong? Didn't Jean start to develop the Phoenix at the end of last movie, and just for sequel bait, and then that's not brought up here again, and it doesn't seem like that it's even possible that the Phoenix even knew about her before this movie starts. So anyway, let me talk about the Phoenix for a second. Once again, it's kind of a nothing plot device. It takes over Jean, or at least, like, it's a power that goes into her and then drops her inhibitions. And there's kind of an identity thing, an identity question with it that is not especially interesting, but at least there is an internal conflict with her where she's trying to decide if she wants to still be who she was before, or if now that she's learned about this past that Xavier has suppressed, she should use this power and, take revenge on him for it and see herself as superior and take over everybody. It's not like in X-Men 3 where Jean is constantly fighting with the other personality. In this, it is more like she's fighting with herself. We are really ambiguous about what hold the Phoenix even really has on her, and if it has a personality of its own at all. But I like that it's trying to be a little bit more like the comics in that she is made responsible for all the stuff that she does, at least to some degree. Although, I will say there are characters that say, well, that's not really Jean, she didn't really do that, and other characters that think that it is. And so I guess there's just an argument there and nobody really knows, because the Phoenix never really comes out and introduces itself and says anything. So we're just kind of left to speculate what exact hold it has on her. It's just very ambiguous about that. There's not any, like, majesty to the Phoenix, which is the big thing I thought you would want to bring if you were going to attempt the Dark Phoenix story again. We just don't have she just doesn't have any gravitas. Once again, it's just, I've got all this power and I'm conflicted and angry, and the difference with X3 is she's not made totally evil with it. So I guess that's good. But anyway, so yeah, wasn't real impressed with how that was handled. She's not the only bad guy in this, like she kind of is in X-Men 3 with Magneto. In this, there's an evil alien race that is also after the Phoenix Force, and it is very generic and not interesting at all, and is they're trying to play them, they're shapeshifters, and they're trying to play them real ominous and scary, and they're not. And I don't care about them, and the whole third act is just a big fight with them, and I don't care. And so that's unfortunate. That feels like just an excuse to have something else going on, some other villain besides just Jean being taken over by the Phoenix Force. And it's just not interesting, and I don't care. This movie has revenge-itis real bad. I can't tell you what characters it has it with without spoiling things, but there are a couple of characters that as soon as somebody gets hurt that they really care about, become real one-note and stop being thinking people. And I get that being angry and upset about something horrible happening to a person you care about can make you lose yourself for a second, but it's played like it's played like a character motivation that is just perfectly logical, and this is just what happens to people. Like, every single person, this is what they would do. They would just completely lose themselves and get impulsive and not be thinking at all, and they wouldn't start acting reasonable again until some big major event, kind of snapped them out of it. And it kind of ruins a character. I should also mention that Mystique is awful in this. She is completely sanctimonious and insufferable, and I don't think that's on purpose. I don't think the movie knows it. She's the one character that's picking up on Professor X's moral ambiguity and is thinking that it's just his world and everybody else is living in it, and she acts like all this time he hasn't really actually cared about anybody but himself. She seems real out of character also. And again, I know a lot of years have passed in between. This was the Dark Knight Rises argument that people gave me when I said, 8 years passed, and I felt like there were characters that were kind of out of character, and people were like, well, you haven't seen them for 8 years. Okay, that's fair, but there's like an oversimplification that happened, and it also feels like it hasn't been building for all this time. It feels like just recently, suddenly, Mystique is turning against Xavier, and I get why she is doing that to some degree, but she's acting like he's just always been terrible. And then, again, when you find out what he did to Jean Grey in the past, I just think it's ridiculous to take that leap and say that he's never cared about anybody and he's always just been this kind of master manipulator. And I don't know where the movie's coming down on it. I don't know if the movie thinks that Xavier is a good person or a bad person by the end of the film, which is really very strange and ends up making it look a little cynical on the level that X3 did. Besides that, it's not as cynical. But yeah, overall, not good, but not entirely in the ways that I expected it to not be good. It's not a completely incomprehensible mess like I thought it might be. It is kind of a mess, but I know what's going on at least, so that's good, I guess. But, like I said, I think the directing is fine. I think the action is fine. But I'm not impressed with characterization, and I think the overall story is just kind of weak, is just kind of lame. So anyway, if you saw this movie, leave your comments and let me know what you thought of it, and I will talk spoilers some again next week on the Captain Logan Show if anybody is interested in hearing me talk about that. There's more I could say, but I would be spoiling a bunch, so I'm not going to do that right now. I just wanted to kind of put in my verdict and say that I'm not feeling it, and that it's unfortunate that this is the last movie in this franchise, but it also kind of felt like this whole universe was over for me anyway, so I'm having a hard time getting worked up about it or anything. Leave your comments. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Captain Logan, and I'll see you again very shortly with more stuff on Geekvolution. Bye, folks.